Someone's loading it, I guess. No, I have nothing to do with Goldman Sachs. Nothing to do with Goldman Sachs. Well, hopefully they'll get the program up. Thank you, Creighton, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your stamina at this time of day. Stamina is really important to our work, as I think the previous speakers have indicated. We're finally at the place in the program that I think you've all really been waiting for, the part that has to do with politics and has ugly slides instead of really pretty slides. So I want to close this session by saying a few things about how we can become more effective at creating and protecting the kinds of areas that are being talked about, how we can become more effective at making a wild world. And I just can't imagine more important work. So, oh, okay, okay. .09.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the end, we're all numbers.
There we are. 40% numbers.
Open. Right there, that's you, David Johns. That's it. Come on.
See, we just get the politics.
I know. I think it's the NSA. It feels like sabotage. Well, what you would see if the slide program was up is an old Arcob cartoon that shows the Earth sitting in a giant blender. And it's on fast speed, and you see the Earth sort of being eaten up and spewing out various kinds of products. And so I was going to start with a little bit of darkness before the light, and simply say that despite our many accomplishments, which are very, very real and the result of very hard work, and despite new opportunities, the human footprint is continuing to grow. It's not shrinking, and there's tremendous inertia. And that, of course, is the problem we confront. Now, some conservationists, in the name of pragmatism, have said we must accept this trend and resign ourselves. Grazie. Okay, there it is. Some of you may have seen this. This is from the 1960s, very prescient. Some conservationists have said that we have to accept this trend and sort of resign ourselves to minimalist goals. And this is where it leads. You know, we give away half of what's ever left to development, and pretty soon we're not left with much. And I think none of us in this room would find that acceptable at all. And I should say there will be a symposium on October 8th at 3 o'clock, which is going to address some of the arguments of these, of the minimalists, if you will. Now, in politics, it's really, really important to be flexible on tactics and to be constantly innovative. It's the only way to gain ground, to sort of stay ahead of your opponents. But to compromise on goals is simply to invite being run over. Rewilding the world really depends on pushing the envelope. A very brief example, in the 1990s, the Wildlands network called for protecting up to 2/3 of the North American land base in a protected area reserve system. Critics freaked out. It was called the end of civilization. Many conservationists feared serious blowback. But within 10 years, virtually every major NGO, as well as countless grassroots NGOs, were endorsing large-scale conservation and connectivity. Now, one of our great strengths is perseverance. Without perseverance, opponents and decision makers just think we're going to go away, and they don't pay any attention to us. But we've really got this down. I think we could be very proud of our perseverance. Politics is sometimes thought of as the art of the possible, but that kind of politics is not going to get us the enduring protection of wildlands full of vibrant populations of native species. Rewilding really calls us to change what is possible, like the great movements which brought abolition, suffrage, democracy, and the end of apartheid. It is possible, it's been done, and we can do it. Even tyrannies have been toppled. Too much is at stake for us not to be pushing the envelope and engaging in politics as changing what's possible. Now, to change what's possible requires political muscle, something we often don't have a lot of. We need to greatly enhance our capacity to reward and punish decision makers and maybe even become decision makers in some cases. And we need to have the will to use that capacity. Okay? That ability, that political muscle really resides in organizations. They're the hammer that we use to enlighten and persuade decision makers. It's really, I'm sorry to say, less the quality of our arguments than the quality of our clout that makes a difference. We cannot be successful and ignore probably one of the most basic of all political lessons, eloquently stated by abolitionist and escaped slave Frederick Douglass. Power, he wrote, concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Injustice and wrong will be imposed till they are resisted. Those who profess to favor freedom but depreciate agitation are people who want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Another important element in increasing capacity and changing what's possible is a clear and bold vision, encased, if you will, or embodied in a compelling story. We really need to be clear about where we're going, what our final goals are. And I think we know that. We want a biologically healthy Earth, and we want human societies that do not destroy life, but in fact adapt themselves to life. Perhaps, perhaps one of the most important attributes of changing what's possible is the creative combination of insider and outsider strategies. What do I mean by this? An insider strategy using normal channels of influence is not going to change the world in any sort of fundamental way, simply because we generally lack the resources to compete with the big money and other interests. Insider strategies also are limited by what the powerful find acceptable. But combined with effective outsider strategies, mass mobilization and grassroots organizing, that gives us the ability to make business as usual impossible. That's leverage. Some of you in this room must be old enough, as I am, to remember the first Earth Days in the 1970s, when we brought tens and hundreds of thousands of people into the streets. It is no accident that many of the strongest laws in conservation in the United States and some other countries were passed in the 1970s. There were many factors there, but that was certainly part of it. Now, grassroots organizing is important because it evokes and deepens caring. Conservation is about science, it's about figuring things out, it's about calculation, it's about measuring, but basically it's about caring and commitment. We need to deepen people's caring, to mobilize that caring, and to increase their commitment to organizations. To do that, we also need to increase their involvement in caring about each other within those organizations. We need to make space for people to play as well as to work. And we also need to increase the strength of the ties people who are participants in conservation with the other networks, the other communities they are part of. Those of you who know something about social movements will know that the civil rights movement in the U.S. depended heavily on black churches. The labor movement depended upon being embedded in self-help groups and neighborhoods. The anti-apartheid struggle was heavily anchored in the townships and the universities. NGOs or I should say a movement consisting mostly of NGOs that depend on check writers, simply does not generate the passion. We don't get people out when we really need them to be out and to act. Mass mobilization also better enables us to seize the opportunities created by crises and division among opponents. That can be very, very important. Now, even mass mobilization will not be strong enough, will not give us the strength to go it alone. What we are going to have to do is to build coalitions, and often our approach to coalitions has not been very clear-sighted, I think. We really need to focus on figuring out and identifying those groups that we need on our side to win. We need to figure out what is our goal, who are the decision makers, and who do we need on our side to put us over the top. And that's who we need to build coalitions with. An aside here that I think is really important. There is no such thing from a political standpoint as the public. It simply doesn't exist. There are groups of people, some of whom are organized and some of whom aren't, some of whom have great influence, some of whom have some influence, and some who have very little influence. And those are the things we need to take into account when we focus on building coalitions. Many of the coalitions we need to build will not be based on shared principles. They'll be based on a quid pro quo, on essentially backing each other and trading influence. And with mass mobilization, we'll actually have something to bargain with. Now, if you think that the picture I'm presenting of politics is too crude, I would ask you to consider the advice of Bruce Babbitt. This was something he said to conservationists when he became United States Secretary of the Interior, and everyone was thinking, this is great, we've got somebody who's really sympathetic, he's on our side. He said, don't expect me to do the right thing, make me do the right thing. What he was really saying is, I need cover. I need for you to make it safe for me to do the right thing. I need to be able to say that I'm getting so much heat from the conservation community and their allies that I have no choice but to do this. There is simply no substitute for ongoing organized pressure. There's no mystery to it. The conservation movement still does it, but not as much as we need to. We've certainly done it in the past. Making the world a wilder place, realizing the theme of this conference, really calls us to redevote ourselves to it now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.